Hey everyone, welcome to the Zeitgeist on a Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Jane Roper. Today with me from sunny LA is David Ambroz, author of A Place Called Home. Hello, David.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you too. David is a national poverty and child welfare expert and advocate. He was recognized by President Obama as an American champion of change. He currently serves as head of community engagement West for Amazon. He previously led corporate social responsibility for Walt Disney Television and has served as president of the Los Angeles City Planning Commission, as well as a California Child Welfare Counselor member. After growing up homeless and then in foster care, Dave graduated from Vassar College, and later from UCLA School of Law. He's a foster dad. Yep, there we go. All the credentials are there on the wall, just to make sure. He's a foster dad, also, and currently lives in LA, as we said. David is the author of A Place Called Home, and you've got yours there, and I've got mine here, and it's a beautiful cover. It's a riveting personal account of Ambroz's early life of poverty and homelessness. He endured begging, bathing in public restrooms, and foster care, where he endured physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, all of which were compounded because of his sexuality. The book has earned some raves from all over the place. Jeanette Walls, author of The Glass Castle, fabulous book, says, "A Place Called Home will take your breath away. You will fall in love with David Ambroz, his beautifully told, gut-wrenching story, and his great big heart." Someone named Hillary Clinton said, "It's impossible to read A Place Called Home and not want to redouble your efforts to fight the systems of poverty that have plagued America for far too long." In this book, David issues a rousing call to make this a more humane and compassionate nation. That's pretty cool. I mean, you get a blurb from Hillary Clinton. That's it's not too bad.
Life-changing. I mean, it really was pretty profound to have someone of her character and history.
Yeah, amazing.
Read and give thoughts.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Congrats on that, and congrats on the book in general. I will say also, when it's funny, that quote about falling in love with David, I listened to a lot of the books, so I went back and forth between reading and listening to the audiobook. And I love listening to audiobooks when the author reads them, and it just, I feel like I know you, even though I don't. But it's just like this intimate experience. And so those of you who are, buy the book one way or the other, but if you're an audiobook person, it's a really nice one to listen to on audio. So welcome. Really glad to have you here. So your childhood, which you describe in great detail in the book, was one of really constant change, instability, going between, bouncing between homes, being homeless, being in shelters, staying with foster families. There really was such a lack of consistency, right? Which is, I think, what makes for what every child needs is that sort of sense of stability and certainty. In the very beginning of the book, you and your siblings, you have a sister and a brother, literally on the verge of freezing to death as you're walking around New York with your mom, and she's trying to find a place for you to stay for the night. Can you tell us a bit about, how your family fell into these circumstances? Sure. What happened that landed you there?
As far back as I can remember, I was born into homelessness. There was no before, and for myself, and it was my entire normal for 11 years, 12 years, my first 12 years of my life. What landed us there was a mom struggling to take care of 3 kids with a progressive mental health illness, and then a country that, basically ended support for people living with or struggling with mental health. We ended the care, and we promised to locate mental health services in the community. We just never fulfilled that promise. And once you're down there and you're struggling, it's almost impossible to get out of it. My mom, I always remember my mom constantly having to apply to different programs to get support. And this is a person struggling just to deal with the day. And there were absurd things like you had to have an address to apply for rental assistance. Or, you had to come back in and fill out more paperwork for yet another siloed program.
Right.
And today there's still 8.5 million children living in poverty in today. Yeah. So my family story is maybe extreme, but not atypical for what's going on even right now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it is astonishing reading about all the hurdles that there were, all those bureaucratic and administrative
Mhm.
hurdles. It's and clearly people who are designing this are not, haven't experienced it themselves because they don't seem to understand how difficult some of those hurdles are. Or maybe I don't know, maybe it's purposely made that way as something of a deterrent. Um,
Yeah, I think that's not. We are the system. The system
mhm,
is not this amorphous thing out in the nether regions.
sure.
We are it.
Yeah.
Um, Government is a description of, I like to say, of the sandbox we create so we don't kill each other. We are the government.
Yeah.
It allows us to play together,
Yeah.
and we just have hacked away at it. We have stopped believing in it.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm here today is because of food stamps, welfare,
Mhm.
scholarships to go to college,
Right.
um, rental assistance when we had it. Imperfect and painful
Yeah.
and challenging,
Yeah.
but still, thank God for it. I wouldn't be here without it. So
Right.
voting every once in a while does not make us active citizens. We have to get way more engaged and realize that
Mm.
these people are not going to solve our problems. We are,
Yeah.
especially for kids that don't vote. We need to be way more active to be
Right.
their advocate.
Right. And I wanna ask you a little bit more about that down the road because I know, a lot of folks are, who will read this book and hear your story are gonna wanna, the natural question is, "What can I do?" But
Yeah.
we'll get to that. Um, one of the things I found, sort of kind of disturbing, just talking more about the system, was how hapless some of the efforts were to try to
Mm.
help you. You were, your mother was physically and emotionally abusive toward you,
Yeah.
and yet after time, it seemed like um, it was so hard for you to get adults to take you seriously. And in some cases, you were questioned about abuse in front of your abuser.
Mhm.
And it sort of seems like,
Yeah.
how is that possible? And you really had to fight for yourself again and again, didn't you?
Yeah. I've always thought about programs like poverty or foster care. I think about it as like I'm on a lifeboat with a bunch of people, and we look off on the side, and there's someone drowning.
Hmm.
And the boat goes over, and one of us reaches out and we lift that person up, and they go, and then we drop them.
Yeah.
And then the next person picks them up a few minutes later, and then they drop them.
Right.
And we never pull the person out.
Yeah.
And that is what happened to me. The
Mm.
interventions of individuals saved my life.
Yeah.
However, they weren't sustained. So a meal, super important. I had a meal that day. I was starving or begging for money, getting that money so my family had what it needed, at least in that moment.
Yeah.
We were constantly able to just get that breath of air. But
Hmm.
ultimately, it took my early adolescence to understand that I needed to be my own savior and perhaps that for my family. And the incident you talk about with being interviewed in front of my mom by the Department of Social Services, it is a glaring example of, gosh, let's not do that.
Yeah.
However, I I think about what that social worker dealt with. Probably had on average today, it's around 30 kids. She probably had 40.
Right.
Probably was stretched all over the place driving in Western Mass, which is rural,
Hmm.
and probably didn't get paid very much. So
Right.
here's this person with a master's degree struggling to meet the needs of 40 plus children.
Right.
And what do we expect when we hack away at a system? I don't
Mm-hmm.
think she went in there and like, I'm going to hurt David Ambroz.
Of
I think
course. Yeah.
I think she's just trying to get through her day.
Yeah.
And so I do think, gosh, let's make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
But I also go, it happened because of our neglect as a society. It happened
Mm.
because no one's paying attention to
Yeah.
what's going on with kids.
Yeah.
And not since 1999 has a presidential debate discussed child poverty. We've
Really.
talked about coal miners, and there's a
Sure.
couple thousand of them, and we should talk about them.
Hmm.
But there are 425,000 foster children.
Wow.
There are 8.4, 8.5 million children in poverty, and we're not talking about it.
Yeah.
So yes, that social worker definitely should have not done that.
Sure.
But when we hack away at a system, we can't be shocked
Right.
when the results are thus.
Right. Yeah, and you can't really blame the individuals who
I
are
don't.
stretched so thin.
Yeah.
When you talk about, what has been hacked away at, you mentioned something before about care being taken away. Is that in reference to welfare reform under Clinton or some other policy that you were talking about specifically?
I was two things. Thank you for. I conflated them probably.
Oh, no.
Two things. One, when we deinstitutionalized the mentally ill, out of the institutions we had across the country, the
Mm,
other part of that promise was community-based mental health care.
mm,
That never materialized. So we
mhm.
shut down the whole mechanisms across the country that the federal government reimbursed states for,
Right,
but we never followed through and said, hey, here's the clinic where you can get the treatment you need.
right.
The other piece is culturally, it's like a scarlet A. Like people are so ashamed of
Yeah.
discussing their challenges,
Mhm.
and we shame people. If an individual had cancer, we would be empathetic and we wear colors and ribbons.
Right,
There's very little
right.
discussion about people struggling with mental health. It's shameful. We're
Yeah,
taught to be ashamed of it. And yet so many of us struggle with different issues, and people in our lives do.
yeah.
So I think we need I call it a coming out movement for many things, one of which
Mhm.
is to be more open as a society to talk about either your challenges or those that you love.
Yeah,
And just like talking about kids, I think if we center these issues, we can have a more, I don't know, benevolent society. We
yeah.
don't need to shame people. We need to love them, lift them, and support their families.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And that the mental health piece, when you have a parent with a mental health issue, it's they need the care, but also it's
Absolutely.
the kids are stuck,
Yeah.
um yeah, I have my aunt is severely bipolar with psychosis, and it's just I often think about the fact if it weren't for, my family has taken care of her financially and
Yeah.
practically for years, but she would absolutely be out on the street if she didn't
Yeah.
have that support, if we didn't have the means to do that. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, it's heartbreaking. Um, as a growing up, you sort of gradually, came to the realization that you were attracted to boys, to men,
Hmm.
and realized you were gay. But it seems like a lot of adults around you realized that before you did. And that really affected the way you were treated
Absolutely.
and the way you were handled within the foster care system. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, foster care really reflected our cultural values and norms. It wasn't
Mhm.
some sort of Martian thing. It was a reflection of our society. I was diagnosed really early on with gender identification disorder, which is
Hmm.
still used, but no longer used to diagnose boys that are gay, for instance.
Right.
It's more commonly associated with trans and gender dysmorphia. But
Mhm.
at the time when I went into foster care, it was used to create a treatment plan and a cycle of treatment for individuals like myself who were gay or lesbian or who knows, somewhere in
Mhm.
between.
Yeah.
And even before then, though, I was already being taught by society how disgusting and valueless I was. When we grew up in New York City, it was the early 80s.
Right.
And I remember in all the shelters all across the city were young men dying of
Right.
HIV/AIDS.
Right.
And it was very clear that society was like not doing anything.
No. Yeah.
And then I went into foster care where they were actively trying to undo something that's not changeable.
Right.
And it was brutal. It wasn't until I had a really loving, supporting foster mom in Northampton and
Mhm.
dad that I began to a 10-year journey to come out
Mhm.
and unlearn the lessons that society taught me and that therapists and other individuals hurt me trying to
Yeah.
change me. It took a long time.
Yeah.
Um, and it reflected our society. We
Right.
did not stop trying to treat gay kids across the country in foster care until President Obama's second term.
Wow. Wow.
It was illegal to have gay sex in 38 states in
Yeah.
my 30s. So
Right.
I think
Right.
we've come far, and it seems like
Yeah.
a long time ago, but it really wasn't. And foster
Right.
care reflected our values as a country, even in
Mhm.
a liberal place like Massachusetts. And I
Right.
was very proud to be part of a movement when I was young with Lambda Legal and Child Welfare League
Mm.
that started the work to end the treatment of queer kids in foster care as well as in delinquency, which is basically jail.
Right.
And that work continued until, like I said, a very long time later when it finally crossed the finish line.
Amazing.
And just because it's on paper does not mean that's what's practiced in real life. We have to make sure that what we pass in laws and policies gets
Yeah.
implemented, especially in the places where queer kids, are so vulnerable.
Yeah.
20% of kids in foster care are queer or identify as queer.
Mhm.
20%. Why
Yeah.
is that?
Right.
And what are we doing to make sure they're okay, they're
Right.
loved, they're healed?
Mhm.
And I'm still involved, but it was a brutal upbringing, and foster care did a lot to really hurt my ability to be who I was and ultimately became.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk about that. Who you became and how your upbringing and youth sort of shaped who you are and your character. There are many things about the mentality of scarcity or an uncertainty,
Hmm.
right? Where you're not able to really think beyond immediate needs, right?
Yeah.
You're very focused on the present. You're not, thinking about the future. You also ingrained very, as someone who suffered abuse from adults, but also, rejection by adults
Hmm.
or cruel treatment in some cases. You many times in the book you're bracing yourself for
Yeah.
to be rejected, to be hit, to be
Yeah.
um and I'm wondering how, do you feel like those things that you grew up with still shape the person that you are today? Some of those attitudes and defenses that you built up throughout your childhood and adolescence?
Not if I can help it.
Yeah.
Uh, I have had great mental health care.
Yeah.
And after a very long time of not dealing with the stuff that came up in my early life, the book was part of a healing process by which
Mm.
I no longer carried the same ballast weight with
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And releasing a lot of the secrecy and shame that I had around the things that I had to do to survive or that were done to me
Yeah.
was incredibly cathartic, as
Mm.
was being much more open and talking about it.
Yeah.
So, does it stay with me? Absolutely.
Mm.
But do I have the same level of behavior that's affected by it? No.
Right.
I have sought really great treatment. I'm now much more open about these things, and I feel as though when I'm living like an authentic life, when I'm doing this kind of work,
Mhm.
I am I'm in my zone,
Mhm.
and I feel alive. And I
Yeah.
think that speaks to openness and authenticity. It doesn't mean I don't have moments or sometimes nightmares. I absolutely do. I
Yeah.
think we all do, no matter how nice or normal our upbringing was. Um, Trauma is trauma is trauma, and it may wear a
Yeah.
different outfit. It may seem bigger or smaller depending on the individual,
Right.
but I think we're all affected by it. Do I have moments when I walk by, like I see a homeless person on the street and I'm triggered? Absolutely. But I
Mhm.
don't collapse. I
Yeah.
think to myself, what can I do? What am I doing? Am I doing enough?
Yeah.
And this book and being so open was really a huge part of it. Like, I
Mm.
didn't talk about coming out as a homeless person, but I was not very communicative. No one in my life really knew that I had grown up homeless. They sort of knew I was in
Yeah.
foster care.
Yeah.
And I realized like I was embarrassed by it. And I'm like, why
Right.
am I embarrassed by this?
Right. Yeah. Something that was beyond your
Yeah,
control. Yeah, I was gonna ask 'cause, it sounds like the book was the first time you were opening up about certain things and
absolutely.
being public with them. Was part of your goal in writing the book, that sense of catharsis or,
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I describe it thus. So when I was growing up and pretty much through my mid 30s, I would take all of these like endless traumas that were occurring, whatever they were, and violence, deprivation, um, even into my adulthood when I served as a appointed official and people were very angry at these public meetings I presided over.
Mm,
I would take all of these things that normal people might like, like and I just would take them and put them in a clear plastic box, and I would
mm,
label the box, and then I'd put that label and I'd card catalog that system. I knew exactly where everything was. I didn't deny it, but I didn't have to
yeah,
feel it.
mm,
And so when I was about 37, 36, my shelf broke and
ah,
all of those boxes fell off, and I no longer knew how to deal with the world.
mm,
So I had to figure out a new coping mechanism. I had to figure out how to sort through all these things. Writing the book was a huge part of that.
mm,
Writing down is a powerful, for me, mechanism
yeah,
to just release the power that these events seem to hold over us. And it's
mhm,
not a one and done. It's a commitment I have each day to make sure that I'm not a collection of things that happen to me. And part of that is living a life of purpose, living a life where I'm trying to help kids that are growing up like I did in whatever capacity, whatever small way, and
yeah,
trying to make it better for them. And when I do that, these things that seem to might haunt me instead become companions and help me.
mm,
They arm me. They make me feel strong. That like talking in front of crowds, talking to you, like I'm on live television. It's completely insane, and yet I'm talking about something that I really care about, and that gives me the strength. And so they don't necessarily. It doesn't go away.
Yeah.
But instead of pain and weight, they become something that helps me do the work that I want to do.
What a great way of putting it, and what a wonderful. It sounds trite to say lemons into lemonade, but a way to take difficult things and
Or
really use.
limoncello, I would like a
Yes,
cocktail. Do we?
yes,
Let's update that phrase.
that's better. Yes, much better. It's funny, actually, a character in my book says that lemons into limoncello.
There you go.
So yeah, great minds. So we have a question from Gus. This is a great question because this is very relevant to your book. Wonder if you could talk about any adults you encountered in your youth and early adulthood you saw as mentors, and reflections on those individuals who came and went in your life.
Wow. So I think mentors is a very tricky word. I did not have consistent adults in my life other than my mother. People came and went. There was very few folks who lasted more than a couple months. So I wouldn't say I had mentors. My mom was certainly the biggest influence in my life, even though I really didn't go to school for 12 years. I mean, episodically.
Right.
Her 3 children have advanced degrees. That is not magic. That is my mom and her emphasis to us about how important education was. It didn't match her behavior.
Right.
But it's a value that somehow we all got inside of us. I don't know that I could point to a mentor in my early life. As I got older, folks like Holly, who was in the book, my foster mom, and Steve, they were parents, not mentors, I would say, but they're people I really admired and looked up to. And then the only other folks I would say kind of mentor, if I can use that word a little broadly, are my brother and my sister. Throughout my early life, we were each other's bookends. We kept each other upright in these insanely impossible circumstances.
Right.
And we all made it because of each other. And mentorship, sometimes I think people think of like an old person and a young person.
Right.
But sometimes it's your contemporary. Sometimes it's the people in your life, like your mom and your siblings. And for me, they were the only ones. And even when I went into foster care, there was very little consistency.
Yeah.
I don't know if this counts, but you can tell me. I would say I loved reading. I loved school, and it became something that taught me a lot. It taught me to imagine. It's a place I could escape to, and these stories became my companion. Yeah. And that's where I learned a lot too, and ultimately, I think, got me to where I'm at right now. Yeah. But very few mentors in my life, I would say. Nice occasional angels is what I talk about in the book.
Yeah.
With occasional moments of grace and beauty and love. I remember one story, I don't know if you would count this, but I had very rarely been touched by an adult not in violence. And I was in school for a minute, and I had very bad lice. And this school nurse washed my hair. And she was so compassionate, and her touch was so gentle, and her words. And I remember so specifically being like, oh, and it was just like the motherly, loving touch of another human being, just like washing my hair. Yeah. It's 30 years ago, and yet I still remember that moment. So it wasn't a consistency, but it was these moments of grace from these occasional angels that got me through.
Yeah. I was thinking of Gabriela in Spain also. Was another angel for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gabriela in Spain, she inherited really important work that Holly started, my foster mom, to recoup. And I then was able to take what Holly started, move to Spain, and Gabriela took a really young man struggling and helped me through aggressive love. Build and rebuild the character of who I was. And as did Spain. I think when you're overseas in a different country, in a different language, in a different culture, you give yourself permission and forgiveness for being, not sophisticated.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can be easier on yourself, and everyone else is easier on you.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what you're doing. You can kind of relish that.
And boy, did I.
Yeah. Yeah. You're given a lot of leeway, which is great. Absolutely. Now, when you were in high school, I think, right? You had the chance to go down to DC and help advocate for a bill that would provide some support for kids transitioning out of the
Yeah.
foster system. I wish I could say I was surprised, but I wasn't. But it was also still shocking to hear, some of the opposition
Mhm.
from conservative lawmakers saying like, "Hey, you're adults,"
Yeah.
as if the second someone turns 18, as if somehow without a home, without
Yeah.
generational wealth, without family, without any savings or resources to speak at, that somehow everything's, oh yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
It's fine. Start with nothing. But have things gotten better on that count? Are there more services? Because so many foster kids age out of the system and, end up
Yeah.
homeless or end up in jail. Is that
Um,
changing?
so we've made progress. So
Mhm.
I was part of a group. It was called Connected by 24. And what we were advocating for is to extend foster care to the age of 24.
Mm,
And today we've changed the law across the country, and it is foster care can be until age 21, but states have to opt in. Most, if not almost all of the funding for foster care is reimbursed by the federal government. So the
mhm.
federal government said, if you extend it, we will help pay for it.
Right.
Most states have done that, not all. And so we still have to work to do. And you could
Yeah.
imagine which are not. And if folks want to know what they can do, they can find out if their state has done it. And if not, reach out to their legislators to get that done.
Yeah.
Even with that statistic, it's still daunting statistics that on the outcomes.
Yeah.
More foster kids today will go to jail than go to college.
Mm,
More foster kids will become homeless than go to college.
yeah.
And by college, I mean 2-year vocational, any type of education, higher education.
Sure.
Um, are we okay with that?
Right.
We have work to do. It is absolutely better. There is a realization I think all of us can have, which is if you're a parent, is your kid really independent at 30?
Mhm.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So we've not done our job to get these folks ready to be adults, and then we're shocked when
Right.
they have the same statistics
Right.
of their previous foster youth that came before them. We
Right.
can do better. We've made great strides. We're investing in this all
Yeah.
across the country. We're investing in this. Obamacare, your extended health care benefits until you're 26.
Right.
States like California that have extended foster care to 21. It is an unfortunate but apt word is what they call it, emancipation, when you leave
Right.
foster care. And I've always thought that was an odd choice
Yeah.
to call it that, given the weight that word has in our country's history with
Mm,
regards to African Americans and slavery.
right.
And as I've gotten older, I realized that unfortunately it's really too apt.
Mm,
We need to do better by these young people. We should not have more of them dying than going to college or jail or homelessness. We
right.
should be outraged and we should do better. That doesn't mean it hasn't gotten better. And if we do
Yeah.
not acknowledge the progress, folks are not going to want to be with us on the journey. So
Yeah.
figure out what's going on in your community and how you can help. And I've been
Yeah.
working on stuff right here in Los Angeles, for instance, in California to change those statistics.
Right. Now, I wonder what you say to folks, or if you ever feel like there's a danger that someone could look at you and be like, "Well, look, you did fine. So
Mm,
if you did it, why can't anybody do it?"
yeah,
Because that's unfortunately the mentality, I think of some folks be like, "Well, look, it's clearly possible, right? You went to
yeah,
college, you got a law degree, so something must be, it's wrong with other people."
100%. Yeah, I mean, I get asked all the time, like, well, let's map out how you did it, and then we'll make
Mhm.
that the system.
Right.
That is not going to work.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
we should do is individually close our eyes and imagine if you had to put your child into foster care
Yeah.
or someone you love, a niece and nephew. What if it was yourself as a child?
Mhm.
What does that system look like?
Mm. Mhm.
And then we need to go create it. Because if it's not the one we have today, it's not a policy fix we need to do.
Right.
We need to create the system where you'd be okay putting your child or a loved one in foster care. My unique circumstances are impossible. And it doesn't mean that a foster kid or a child in this country should have to survive violence at the level that I did or deprivation. And
Yeah.
we're okay with that. Oh, if he made
Right.
it, we can. That's nonsense.
Right.
We have more than half of our schools have Title I free, or Title I schools, which means they have free lunches. That means their families are hungry.
Right.
Are we okay with that?
Right.
So the impossible circumstances, I think of my life like Forrest Gump crashes into hillbillyology with a little bit of Precious. And I think, should we put people through that gauntlet?
Right. Right.
Or should we treat these children like we would our own?
Right.
And then design a system robust enough to love them, care for them, and help them reach their full potential. I just cannot imagine anyone wants people to experience what I did as a program, or policy.
Right.
If you read the book, I can't imagine a loving human being that would want these things for any child.
No.
So yes, I made it in spite of all this, not because of it. And I'm grateful for the life I had. I would not change my life. It made me the person I am. And I love that I look around and I see so many people I feel like are somewhat numb, kind of living life without purpose. And I feel so blessed and so fortunate that I feel a strong sense of purpose. Yeah. And that gives so much meaning to my days. I feel so pulled forward by what I hope to do. And find yours. But if I hear the phrase, pull yourselves up by your bootstrap, I didn't have shoes.
Right.
The book opens with me, with shoes I picked out of the trash.
Right.
That is not a program for positive youth development. That is not a moral or economic thing we should think to do. So yes, I made it, but barely.
Right. And you were an outlier. I mean, you're absolutely, you're the exception, not the rule. So yeah. So, first of all, if folks watching have any remaining questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. And I guess my question to you is, so, for those of us who, can't become full-time advocates and volunteers or whatever, but we do want to do what we can to make a difference to try to help improve things. What would you tell folks to do?
First, thank you for the question. I think all of us in our day-to-day life start with why I can't. So we walk by a homeless person and like, well, I can't. Or we see environmental catastrophe and we're like, well, I can't affect that. And we all start in that place because we have full lives with so much demands on our mental space. We have our family, we have our own struggles. And so of course, the first thing we think about is like, I can't save that kid. Right. And that's not what I'm asking you to do. That's not right for everybody to become a foster parent. To me, that's the highest level of the ladder of engagement that I talk about. First thing we can do as individuals is care. And care can manifest just in learning a little bit. So for instance, Coco Chanel, foster kid, Steve Jobs adopted out of foster care, Cher, foster kid, Marilyn Monroe, Willie Nelson, Tolstoy. Have fun. You don't have to learn about that particular list, but educate yourself. Give yourself, out of this coming year, 15 minutes to get on Google or DuckDuckGo and learn a little bit. And then I kind of go up from there. Like I have this campaign right now called Donate Your Small Talk. And the idea is when you get in an elevator and you're like, how was your weekend? What did you have for lunch? How are your kids? Nobody actually cares. Right. No. It is polite conversation to fill dead space. What if we talked about kids? What if we looked up something interesting we cared about with children and we kind of wove it into our conversation? What if we started centering the condition of America's kids in our dialogue? Yeah. Everyone can donate their small talk. And then it goes up from there. Volunteer. There are very concise moments when you can volunteer. You don't have to do it all year long. Or you can do it all year long and become a CASA. So there's all these ways you can start to integrate this topic into your life without having to go all the way to the extreme, which I hope a lot of people do. However, it doesn't negate all these things that are super important as well. Because if we talk about foster care or if we talk about homeless kids, if we volunteer, all of a sudden our elected people, our political structure will reflect our values. So I have a ton of stuff on my website, which I know we're posting to, davidambroz.com. Under the activism link, you can find all of these things that I'm talking about through my nonprofit, Foster More. So I encourage people to jump in. But at the very least, start with this idea. I can do X.
Yeah.
I am always boggled in our country. We went from landing a man on the moon with no computers, basically,
Yeah.
to this pride we have for filling potholes now.
Right.
And I don't know what happened in the span, basically, of my life, where we went from dreaming and doing to just getting by.
Yeah.
But I want us, at least on the topic of children, to get back to imagining a country where there are not 8 million plus children in poverty. I
Yeah.
think we can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Seems like we absolutely can.
Yeah.
I hope you're right. And thank you for that. And the other thing, I mean, people can read the book. I mean, this is a great place to start. Read the book.
Educate yourself. There you go.
Educate yourself. Yeah. I mean, get this very vulnerable, honest, moving account of what it's like, and how that journey can go, and how difficult it can be, but how there are opportunities all along the way that things could be better. So thank you so much, David. This was really great. I really enjoyed the book, and I hope people will read it, and I hope people will take your advice to heart. So best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Book events.
Thank
and
you.
Hope we'll be seeing you around in the future, maybe something else down the road.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Appreciate the conversation.